Hey everyone, this is Tapan Sharma here, and welcome to a new tutorial. And in this tutorial, we'll be building an infinite scrolling behavior using Laravel, Inertia.js, and React. So as you can see, this is the project that we'll be building in this tutorial. And we are initially loading 10 records because we don't want to load all the records from the database because that might cause performance issues, and we don't want to load all the records initially. So as you can see, we are loading 10 records initially, and you can also notice the height of the scroll bar in here. It's of this size, but as soon as I scroll to the bottom of the page, then we will load additional data from the backend. So if I scroll to the bottom, if I reach the end of the page, then as you can see, additional data is loaded from the backend and the height of the scroll bar has decreased, which kind of verifies that additional data has been loaded. So as you can see, if I scroll to the bottom, additional data is loaded from the backend. And yeah, this kind of mimics the infinite scrolling behavior that we might need in some web applications. So depending on the requirements, you might need to implement this. And again, we'll be using Laravel along with Inertia.js, and we'll be using React as our front-end stack. And even though Inertia version 2 is coming soon, and that comes with a lot of features, and one of them is to implement these infinite scrolling behaviors, and we don't have to build everything from scratch. It offers that feature by default in Inertia version 2, but even though that is coming soon, but I think implementing this from scratch will help you learn a lot of stuff about how Inertia works and how you can implement this using React and Inertia. And we'll initially build this using the Inertia's router, but while building that using Inertia's router, we will face a few issues. There are a few limitations of Inertia's router, and we will replace that with Axios. So yeah, we'll learn everything along the way, and I believe that this is going to be really helpful for you. And one more thing that I want to mention before we start working on this is this tutorial is actually a part of my course about Inertia and React. And as you can see, this course is hosted on Udemy, and it contains about 10 hours of video content. And the name, as you can see, is Laravel 11 with Inertia.js and React. And as you can see, the ratings are also good. All the students have been appreciating this course, and they have mentioned that it is quite helpful for them. So yeah, this is a part of my course. And as you can see, we'll learn a lot of stuff along the way. This is a project-based course, and we'll learn to build out multiple practical projects along the way. So yeah, if you want to learn more about integrating Inertia with React and Laravel, then I think this course is for you. So yeah, I'll link this in the description below, and you can check it out. And along the way, as you can see, we will learn how to build out flexible Flash notifications, along with how we can customize error pages. We'll also learn how to build out a students management system, and this consists of implementing search functionality along with class filters. And we'll also look at how we can implement roles and permissions in Inertia-based applications. We'll also look at how we can implement infinite scrolling. So this tutorial that I've uploaded on YouTube is actually a part of this course. And we'll also look at how we can implement translations in Laravel and Inertia. So yeah, as you can see, this is a fully project-based course, and you'll learn a lot of stuff along the way. And you can see the reviews and ratings as well. So yeah, enough of the talks. Let's now go ahead and look at how we can build this from scratch. And in the next part, we will actually start by installing a fresh Laravel project, and then we will start working on the features. So yeah, without any further delays, let's get started. Okay, so let's start things off by installing a fresh Laravel project. And As you can see, I'm using the Laravel installer to install a fresh Laravel project, and I've named the project as Inertia React Infinite Scrolling. So yeah, let's hit enter. And for the starter kit, I'm going to use Laravel Breeze. So yeah, let's go ahead and hit enter. And for the stack, we will be using React with Inertia as expected. And for the optional features, I'm not going to choose any of the optional features because it's not necessary for this project. So yeah, without choosing anything, I'll hit enter. And for the testing framework, I'm going to choose PEST, even though we won't be writing any test, but still I'm going to choose PEST. And yeah, I would like to initialize a Git repository, so I'll choose yes. And while we're here, let's also talk about the database that we'll be choosing. So based on my needs, I'm going to choose SQLite as my database option. But if you have a requirement where you need to choose any other options, then you can go ahead and do that. And if you already have a project where you need to implement infinite scrolling, then you can basically skip the initial lectures about setting up the project. And yeah, you can skip these lectures and you can directly watch the lecture where we actually start implementing the infinite scrolling feature. So yeah, in this case, I'm going to choose SQLite, and yeah, the project is going to be installed. And in the next part, we will configure our project and define a model along with migrations and seeders to seed our data so that later we can implement infinite scrolling. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and define a model, and along with that, we'll also define a seeder to seed some data because we need to implement infinite scrolling and we need some data to be able to implement infinite scrolling. And for our project, I'm going to define a really simple use case. I'll define a single model and it won't have much columns. I'm assuming that you already have a project where you need to implement infinite scrolling. So yeah, in that case, you can basically skip this lecture as well and probably look into lecture 3 or 4. So yeah, from that lecture, we'll actually start implementing infinite scrolling. And for now, we are just setting up the project. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new model. And I'm going to name this as post model. So yeah, let's go ahead and define this model called post. And along with that, we will also define the factory and the seeder by passing -mfs flag. And this is going to create all of those files in one command. Okay, I'll hit enter and let's open these up one by one. Let's open up the post model. Let's open up the post factory along with the migration and the seeder. And let's start with the migration file first. And for now, we'll only define two columns where one is going to be title, so table string title, and the other one is going to be teaser, just to display some teaser content. And yeah, that's enough for our case. And let's also go ahead and work on the post factory. So here we can define the title by using the sentence helper of faker. And we can probably limit this by 6 words, I guess. Okay, that should work. And for the teaser, we can use paragraph as well. But in this case, I'll just pass sentence and limit this by 15 words. Okay, we don't need so much of content. Okay, that's done. And let's now go ahead and work on our post seeder. So we'll define 100 records, and we can do that by referencing our post factory. And we want to create 100 records. So instead of 50, I'll pass 100 and then we will create them. Okay, let's also go ahead and import the post model. And now we need to call this on our database seeder. So let's open that up. I'll just get rid of everything and then we can call our seeder by calling this call. And inside that, we can define an array. And inside that array, we can call our post seeder. Okay, that's done. And let's quickly go ahead and seed this. But before we do that, let's also go ahead and define a new seeder for seeding the users table because I don't want to manually register all the time. So let's quickly go ahead and define a new seeder for seeding the users data. Okay, here we can define a users variable, and inside that we can define multiple users. For now, I'll just define one user, which is going to have credentials of name as admin. Okay, the email is going to be admin@admin.com. Okay, let's pass that. And the password is going to be the hashed version of password. Okay. And finally, we need to call user insert to insert this data into the database. Okay, that's done. Let's also import the user model from app models user. Okay, and we also need to call this on our database seeder. So let's go ahead and do that. So user stable seeder, and then we can run artisan migrate fresh dash dash seed, which is also going to seed our data. Okay, and everything looks good. Okay, that's done. And in the next part, we will be displaying the post data, and then we will look at how we can implement the infinite scrolling feature. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's now go ahead and configure an intersection observer. And with the help of that intersection observer, we'll basically be able to watch for the visibility of an element. And the element in this case can be any valid HTML element like a div or a paragraph or a span. But in this case, we'll use div. So whenever that div is visible in the viewport, then we will make a request to the backend asking for additional data so that we can implement the infinite scrolling feature, and we'll place the element that we want to watch at the end of our loop, so at the bottom of the loop. And whenever the user scrolls to the bottom of the page, then we will trigger a method which will basically make a request to the backend requesting additional data so that we can implement the infinite scrolling feature. And we can implement everything from scratch, like the intersection observer can also be implemented from scratch, but there's a package that is already implemented by other developers and it's actively maintained. So yeah, we'll be using that to implement the intersection observer. So yeah, let's go ahead and look into the package, and we'll configure this in this video, and then we will implement the infinite scrolling in the upcoming video. So yeah, this is the package that we'll be using, and the name, as you can see, is React Intersection Observer, and it has a lot of features. As you can see, it has the hooks or the component API. The performance is optimized. It also matches with the native API. It is written in TypeScript. It is easily testable and tree shakeable. So yeah, there's a lot of features. And as you can see, we can use this use in view method to basically watch for an element's visibility. And whenever that element is visible in the viewport, we will be able to use that data. In this case, the status of the element is stored in this variable called inView. And if the inView is set to true, then it means that the element that we are watching is visible in the viewport. So yeah, let's start by installing this package, and then we will look into the implementation accordingly. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code and paste it over in my terminal. And while that is installing, let's also go ahead and copy this block of code. And we can also pass additional options to this, like a threshold, which basically indicates the percentage of the element that needs to be rendered to set the in-view status. So yeah, we won't be using those in this lecture, but yeah, we can pass additional options, and based on your needs, you can basically look into the documentation and implement the features accordingly. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code, and seems like our package has installed. So yeah, I'll just get rid of that, and I'll just go ahead and paste the code that I just copied over in here. And here, let's quickly go ahead and import the use in view, and we won't be passing any options. So I'll just go ahead and pass an empty object. And now, as you can see, we have these three items that we are destructuring from this use in view method, and the ref in this case is the element that we want to watch for, and the in view is the status, which basically indicates whether the element is in view or not. And the entry is, I'm not really sure what that means, but yeah, we can look into the documentation.
Okay, so it is basically intersection of server entry. So yeah, we don't need this in this case, so I'm not going to implement that. But yeah, these two are the values that we need in this case. Okay, let's go ahead and define a new element that we want to watch for, and we want to define that at the end of the loop. So once we loop over the post data, then we will define a new element over here that we want to watch, and whenever this element is rendered in the DOM, then we want to load additional data from the backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a ref, and we can look into it from the documentation. So here, as you can see, the ref is being passed, and this ref is being grabbed from the useInView method. So yeah, let's quickly go ahead and pass the ref in here. So the ref in this case is going to be the ref that we are receiving from the useInView method. And now we can basically use useEffect to watch for the InView property. Okay, let's quickly go ahead and define useEffect over here. And the second argument that we can pass to the useEffect is the property that we want to watch, which in this case is InView. And whenever that changes, we will just go ahead and log the InView property. Okay, and let's go ahead and give this a try. So we have registered the element and we are referencing this accordingly. And then whenever the InView property changes, we are basically logging that, and everything else is looking good. So we have imported the useInView from React intersection observer. So yeah, let's now go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the project, and I'll just reload it once. And let's also open up the inspector. Let's open up the console, and as you can see, initially it is set to false. But as soon as we scroll to the bottom of the page, then as you can see, the value true is being logged in the terminal, which means that the element that we registered is visible in the viewport, and that triggered the useEffect since our InView property updated. So yeah, everything is implemented properly. And now whenever we hit the bottom of this page, we need to load the data from the backend, and then we will basically merge the original data with the data that we receive from the backend. And we will be doing that in the next video. Let's now go ahead and start implementing the infinite scrolling feature. And in the previous video, we configured the intersection observer, and whenever the element, that is this div, is rendered in the DOM, then we go ahead and execute this block of code. So now we only need to make a request to the backend and then merge the existing data with the data that we get from the backend. So yeah, we'll be doing that in this video, and then we will face a few issues when we try to implement this using Inertia's router, and later we will replace that with Axios. But first, let's go ahead and implement this using Inertia's router. So yeah, here we will check if the InView value is true, because we don't want to load additional data if the element is not visible in the viewport. So yeah, we'll check if the InView value is set to true, then we can use router. Okay, let me go ahead and import that from Inertia.js React, and then we can basically perform a reload to the same page, and then we can pass additional data to this. So here we can pass an object, and inside that object we can pass additional data to this that we want to send to the backend when we are performing the reload. Okay, so in this case we'll pass the page for which we want to load the data, and we can do that by passing the key as data, and this data is again an object, and here we can pass the page. So let's say I'm going to pass a page of 2 just for demonstration, and when the request is successful, then we can go ahead and just log the data for now, and here we can pass on success. Okay, let me pass that, and if the request is successful, then we will just go ahead and log the post.data for now. And what we are basically doing here is, if the InView value is set to true, then we will perform a reload. But along with that, we will also pass a data, which in this case we are passing the page as 2 so that we can load the data for the next page. And when the request is successful, we will just go ahead and log the data that we get from the backend. And in this case, we are logging post.data because post is a prop that has been sent from the backend, as you can see. So yeah, the data for the next page should be logged in here. Okay, I'll just save this. And if we now go ahead and give this a refresh, so I'll just reload. And if I go ahead and scroll to the bottom, then as you can see, we loaded additional data from the backend. And if you go ahead and look into the data, okay, the first item, as you can see, consists of IDs 1 to 10, and the second item consists of ID 11 to 20. So yeah, the data for the next page were loaded, and yeah, this seems to work. So we now need a way to merge the data that we are currently rendering with the data that we get from the backend, and that would technically implement the infinite scrolling feature. So yeah, let's go ahead and implement that. So now what we need to do is we need to merge the data that we are receiving from the backend with the data that is currently being rendered in the DOM. And we can do that by defining a new variable. So what we can do here is we can basically store the initial data in a variable, and then when we receive the data from the backend, then we will basically merge the old data with the new data that we receive from the backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new variable in here called posts data. And initially, this will store the data of post.data, which we are receiving as a prop. And then instead of looping through posts.data, we can directly loop through post.data, and everything should work as expected. And then when we receive the data from the backend, then we will go ahead and merge the old data with the new data. And we can do that by using array destructuring. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that. So we want to merge the post data with the new data. So we can pass posts.data, and this post variable will store the data that is received from the backend, since this is a prop. So yeah, everything should work. And here we are looping through post data. So yeah, everything should work as expected. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try, and we'll go ahead and work on this later once we verify that this implementation is working. Okay, let's now go ahead and give this a try. I'll just navigate to the first page, and use state is not defined. So let's quickly go ahead and import that. So use state from React. Okay, let's reload, and we don't have any errors. But as soon as I scroll to the bottom of the page, okay, we have some errors. So each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Okay, for some reason, the same data has been pushed to this post data, and that's the reason we're getting this unique key issue. So what we can do here is on success, we can receive the response. So let's quickly go ahead and do that. And then for now, I'll just go ahead and log the response. So let's quickly go ahead and do that. And now if I reload, okay, we have some data being logged in here, but we can ignore that for now. And I'll go ahead and navigate to the first page again. And if I navigate to the bottom of the page, okay, we have some data now. So if I go ahead and unfold this and look into props.posts, and inside data, as you can see, the data that we are receiving is from 11 to 20, which means that this is the data that we need. So yeah, we can basically refer this, and probably for some reason, this post data is not being updated accordingly. So yeah, as an alternative, we can basically use the response and then assign our post data accordingly. So here what we can do is we can call response dot, okay, let's see, we have response dot props dot posts. So yeah, we can reference that. Okay, let's now go ahead and give this a try. This should work. Okay, I'll just reload this again and try to navigate to the first page. Okay, and if I scroll to the bottom of the page, Okay, we are still having that same issue. So we are destructuring the post data. Okay, we didn't actually spread this. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. And let's give this a try one more time. Okay, I'll again scroll to the bottom of the page. And now as you can see, we have technically implemented infinite scrolling feature. And as we scroll to the bottom of the page, additional data has been loaded. But yeah, we have an issue about the duplicate key warning, and we can fix that by replacing this page 2 with the post.meta.current page. So this will store the current page, and we can increase the value of that by 1 so that we can load the data for the next page. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a try one more time. I'll again navigate to the first page, and then if I scroll to the bottom of the page, then we are loading the data for the next page. And the current page now is page 2, which can be verified by looking into this URL as well. And if I go ahead and scroll to the bottom again, then as you can see, additional data has been loaded. So yeah, we have technically implemented infinite scrolling, but this has a few issues. And one of the main issues is, as you can see, the request that we are making is stored in the URL. And if I go ahead and reload, then as you can see, the data is now loaded from 21. But initially, we need to load that from ID 1. But because of this URL that has been set in the browser, so based on that, the data has been loaded from the backend. So yeah, that's the issue, and we need to fix this. And we will fix that by using Axios instead of the Inertia's router. So yeah, we'll be doing that in the upcoming lecture.
Okay, so in the previous video, we implemented the infinite scrolling feature using Inertia's router. And while implementing that using Inertia's router, we stumbled upon a few limitations of Inertia's router. And one of the main limitations is when we try to implement the infinite scrolling, when we scroll to the bottom of the page, then as you can see, the URL is maintained in the browser. And when we reload, then as you can see, the data is loaded from that specific page, but we don't want this behavior to happen. We just want to load the data from the beginning when the user reloads. So yeah, this is one of the main limitations. And in this video, we'll replace Inertia's router with Axios. So yeah, let's go ahead and start working on this. Okay, so let's open up our code editor and let's look at the workflow of replacing Inertia's router with Axios. So here we are checking if our element is in view, then we are basically performing a router.reload and we are passing the data, which consists of the page number, and using that data, we can load additional data for the next page. And if the request is successful, then we will basically merge the old data with the new data that we receive from the backend. So yeah, this is the flow. And now we need to replace this with Axios. Okay, so to replace the router with Axios, I'll just go ahead and comment this block for now. And I'll keep this for a reference. And now we can use Axios instead of router. So I'll pass axios.get. And let's also go ahead and import Axios from Axios. And we don't have to install this using the npm command because it gets installed by default in Laravel. So yeah, we don't have to do that. And now we need to pass the link of the next page so that we can load the data of the next page. So how do we do that? So before we pass the link, let's quickly go ahead and log the post prop that we are receiving over here. And I'll just log that over here. So let's just go ahead and log posts for now. And if I go ahead and reload, and then if I try to scroll to the bottom, then as you can see, the data is being logged in here. And if I go ahead and unfold it, then here, as you can see, we have an object called links. And inside that, we have the link to the first page. And along with that, we also have link to the last page and the next page. So yeah, we can basically pass this next page to load the data for the next page. So yeah, let's quickly go ahead and do that. So here we can pass post.links.next. Okay, we have that. And then we can receive that data using the then callback. And here for now, I'll just go ahead and log the response just to see the output. But before we log the response, we have to make a few changes on the backend, because now we are using Axios to make a request to the backend. But yeah, we made a mistake in here. I basically passed the then callback to the console.log. So I'll just go ahead and copy this and replace console.log with axios.get. Okay. And now we need to make a few changes on the backend so that we get a proper JSON response when we make this request to our backend. Because currently, if we go ahead and look into our post controller, then as you can see, we are returning an inertia response. So yeah, this will throw an error when we make an Axios request and Axios expects a response of type JSON, but currently we are returning an inertia response. So yeah, let's go ahead and look into the issue that we'll get when we make this request, and then we will fix it accordingly. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and reload it once, and I'll try to scroll to the bottom of the page. Then as you can see, we are getting a response, but the response in this case is an inertia response. So yeah, we need to instruct Laravel to return a JSON response if the client is asking for a JSON response. And we can easily do that by adding a check in here. So if the request expects JSON, then we can directly return the collection of post resources instead of returning the inertia response. And here, let's quickly go ahead and inject the request class. And now we can check if the request expects JSON, then in that case, we can directly return the post resource instead of returning the inertia response. So yeah, let's go ahead and return that. And now this should work. So let's quickly go ahead and give this a try. I'll just reload it once again. And if I go ahead and scroll to the bottom, then as you can see, the JSON response is now returned from the backend. And if I go ahead and look into this data, then as you can see, the data for the next page is now returned. So yeah, that's done. We now need to merge this data with the data that we are currently rendering. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So on our index.jsx, once we receive the response, we can basically use the set posts to merge both of these. And we implemented this in the previous video. So yeah, that's already done. And now we can set the post data with the previous data. And to merge the new data, we need to pass response.data. And inside that data, we again have another data key, which is added by the API resource. So yeah, let's quickly go ahead and do that. And we don't have to pass any of these. So yeah, that looks good. Let's now go ahead and give this a try. And let's verify whether everything is implemented properly. Okay, I'll again reload. And now if I scroll to the bottom of the page, then additional data is now loaded using Axios. And as you can see, the URL in the browser is not maintained anymore, because initially when we implemented this using Inertia's router, the state of the page was maintained in the URL. But since we have replaced that with Axios, so yeah, the page state is not maintained anymore. And if I go ahead and just reload, then the data is now loaded from the beginning. So yeah, that issue is now fixed. And we still have a few improvements that we can make to this, and we can probably improve the performance of this. So yeah, we'll be working on that in the upcoming video. Okay, so in the previous video, we implemented the infinite scrolling feature using Axios, and everything seems good until this point. But there are a few issues that we still need to fix with our current implementation. But before we do that, let's quickly go ahead and look into the issues. Let's understand why the issues that we are facing is happening, and then we will go ahead and fix them accordingly. So yeah, let's now go ahead and open up the code editor. And here, when we are making a request to the backend, we are passing the post.links.next as the URL while making a request to the backend. So what I will do is I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code and log that data in here just to see what is being stored in this property called next, and then we will understand why the error is happening. So yeah, let's now go ahead and try to scroll to the bottom of the page, and initially the data is loaded for the second page, but if I go ahead and scroll to the bottom again to load additional data, then as you can see, we are getting an error about the unique key issue. But the main problem that we are facing here is after 20, as you can see, the IDs with 21, 22 should be loaded, but we are again loading the same data starting from page 11 to 20, and we are basically in a loop where we are loading the same data again and again. So why is this happening? So to understand the reason for this, let's try to look into the log again. And since we have logged the next page, so yeah, as you can see, the same page is being logged in here, which is the page 2. So yeah, we are basically loading the same data and we are trying to render that data in this page. And that is the reason we are getting this same key issue while trying to render the data in a loop. So yeah, that is the issue. And we now need a way to fix this so that when we make a request to the backend, then we would load the data accordingly for the next page. And we also need to update this URL accordingly so that we won't pass the same URL again and again. So yeah, how do we do this? And I'm not sure if you remember the previous implementation. So when we performed the router.reload, then we were basically passing the page number along with the router.reload method. And with the help of that, we were basically loading the data for the next page. So yeah, in this case, we are not doing that. And we are always passing the same link, and that is causing this issue. So yeah, how do we fix this? So one of the ways to fix this is by storing the next URL in a variable. So when we receive the response from the backend, we could store the next URL in a property, and then we could pass that URL in our Axios.get method, and that would again load the next page, and that would update accordingly whenever we are making this Axios.get request. So yeah, that would get updated, and that is one of the issues by which we can fix this. But instead of that approach, what I also want to do is I want to improve the performance of our pagination. So currently, as you can see, we are performing a simple paginate method, and this is a query-based pagination, which is kind of slow if we have a lot of data. So yeah, instead of this default pagination, we will be using cursor paginate. And I'm not sure whether you know about cursor pagination. So let's quickly go ahead and look into the documentation. So as you can see, while paginate and simple paginate create queries using the SQL offset clause, cursor pagination works by constructing where clauses, and this is more performant in comparison to the default paginate and simple paginate methods. And as you can see, it is also mentioned in here that this method of pagination is particularly well suited for large data sets and infinite scrolling user interfaces. So yeah, in our case, we are implementing infinite scrolling, and for our case, cursor pagination is a perfect choice. And unlike the offset-based pagination, which is implemented by paginate and simple paginate, cursor pagination basically introduces a cursor, which is a hashed value, and based on that cursor, it basically knows the state of the pagination, and based on the hashed value, the next data will be loaded. So yeah, you can look into the documentation and everything is explained really well in here. So yeah, let's now go ahead and introduce cursor pagination instead of the default paginate method. So yeah, instead of paginate, I'm going to pass cursor paginate. And to this, we can also pass the data by which we want to perform the pagination. And everything else is same. We won't make any changes in here. So once we perform the pagination, then we are checking if the request expects JSON, then we are returning the API resource directly. Otherwise, we will return the inertia response. So yeah, that looks good. And now on our front end, we need to make a few changes accordingly so that our code supports cursor pagination. So before we replace this URL, let's go ahead and store a few values using useState. And based on that, we will basically set up the URL for the next page. Okay, so what I will do is I'll define a new variable called path to basically store the path of the URL that we wanna make the request to, which in this case is gonna be post.meta.path. So yeah, we can use useState and then we can pass post.meta.path. And along with that, we will also store the cursor related data so that whenever we are making a request using Axios, then we would pass the updated cursor to this Axios.get method. And that would prevent from loading the same data again and again. And if you're not understanding everything properly, then everything will be clear once we finalize this whole flow. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new variable again. And here we will store the next cursor. And along with that, we also need to set the next cursor, and the initial value of the cursor will be grabbed from post.meta.next cursor, and this can be verified by looking into the post object. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and comment this out for now, and here I'll just log the post prop, and then if we go ahead and reload, okay, I'll just reload, and if I scroll to the bottom, then as you can see, we have this data that has been dumped in here. And yeah, this is the data that is being dumped. And if I go ahead and look into it, and inside the meta object, as you can see, a property called next cursor is available, which is basically a hash version, and this indicates the data for the next page. And we also have a path, which we are storing in a variable called path. And here, as you can see, the previous cursor property is also available, which is initially null for the first page. And just like that, when we are at the end of our pagination, then the next cursor value will be null. And based on that, we will stop the infinite scrolling behavior. So yeah, just wanted to let you know about that. And yeah, we are basically storing these values now. And when we are making a GET request, we can now pass the path. So let's go ahead and pass the path. And along with that, we will also pass the cursor so that we can instruct Laravel to load the next batch of data when we scroll to the bottom of the page. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass the next cursor along with the path, and we can use backticks to do that. So here we'll pass the path, and then we will pass the cursor, and we can do that by passing cursor is equal to the next cursor that we are storing over here. So let's go ahead and pass that. Okay, and now I'll just go ahead and log the response just to see what we get when we receive the data from the backend. Okay, and now if I go ahead and reload, and then if I scroll to the bottom of the page, then as you can see, additional data was loaded from the backend. And along with that, we also get the updated meta object. So let's go ahead and look into that. And the next cursor is now updated, as you can see, and we can verify that by looking into the links object. Okay, we have next and previous. And since we have a previous cursor, so this indicates that we are on page 2, and we also have the next cursor. So the only thing that we need to do now is update our next cursor with the value that we receive from the backend. So yeah, let's quickly go ahead and do that. Set next cursor, and we can do that by passing response.data.meta.next cursor. Okay, that looks good. And whenever we make a request, then we pass the cursor, and initially it will store the value for the page 2, and when
we hit the bottom of the page, then we make a request again. And this time we will have the updated response. And from that response, we will again set the next cursor to the value that we receive from the backend. And just like that, we will load additional data as we scroll to the bottom of the page. So yeah, let's now go ahead and give this a try. I'll again reload and scroll to the bottom. And as you can see, we are loading the data for the second page. And if I further scroll to the bottom, then the issue that we had in the previous lecture should be fixed. And as you can see, the infinite scrolling feature is now complete. So yeah, everything is working as expected. And it is also smooth because we replaced the traditional pagination method with cursor paginate, and it is really efficient in comparison to the paginate method. So yeah, that's it for this video. And in the next part, we'll try to improve this even further, and we'll basically preload the data, and that would further improve the infinite scrolling feature. So yeah, we'll be doing that in the next video. Okay, so we have finally implemented the infinite scrolling feature and everything seems good until this point. But what if we load all the data from the backend and we would basically reach the end of our pagination? So what do you think is going to happen at that point? So yeah, let's go ahead and quickly witness that. And there's an issue that we'll face, but we will fix that in this lecture. So yeah, if I go ahead and scroll to the bottom, I'll try to reach the end of the pagination. We'll load all the data from our backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and load for the data. Let's scroll down. Let's see what's going to happen when we reach the end of the pagination. As you can see, we currently have 100 records. And if I scroll down, then as you can see, we are again starting from page 1. And this is something we don't want, because when we reach the end of the pagination, we basically want to stop loading additional data from the backend. And this is also causing some issues about the unique key. And if you go ahead and look into our inspector, open up the console, then as you can see, we are getting so many errors about the unique key issue. So yeah, this is not the behavior that we want. And let's quickly go ahead and fix this. And after we fix this, we will also introduce a really small improvement that we can apply to preload the data from the backend. Okay, let's go ahead and fix this first. So what we are basically doing is we are checking if our element is in view, and if it is, then we will pass the path, and along with that, we are also passing the cursor. And I think I mentioned this already in the previous lecture, that if we are at the end of our pagination, then the next cursor value will be null. Just like on the first page, the previous cursor value was set to null. So when we are at the end of the pagination, which means that we have basically loaded all the data, then at that point, the next cursor value will be null, and we can basically check if this value is null. Then based on that, we can basically load additional data from the backend. So yeah, when we are checking if the in-view value is set to true, so along with that, we can also check if the next cursor is not null. And if it is not, then we will load the data from the backend. And if this is null, then it means that we are at the end of the pagination. That is, we have loaded all the data from the backend. And now we don't need to load additional data from the backend, because we have loaded all the data. And that's the reason the next cursor value will be set to null. So yeah, with this check, the issue that we are currently facing should be fixed. So yeah, I'll just save this. And now if I go ahead and reload and try to scroll to the bottom again, let's try to load all the data from the backend. And when we reach the end of the pagination, that is when we have loaded all the data, then no further data should be loaded from the backend. And as you can see, the error is now fixed. And if you go ahead and look into our inspector, then we don't have any errors. So yeah, everything is implemented properly. But there's one small improvement that I still want to apply in here. That is, when we are loading additional data, then as you can see, there's a really small jump that is happening when trying to load the data. And we can fix that by applying some tailwind classes to basically shift the element a little above its original position. And that would basically allow us to preload the data before the user reaches that element. And you'll understand what I'm actually trying to say. So let's quickly go ahead and apply that class. So here on this div, I'm going to apply a tailwind class of negative translation. So I'm going to pass a negative vertical translation of 32. So let's go ahead and pass that. And now this will basically shift this element a little above its original position. And since we are shifting this using CSS, so this element will be visible in the viewport before the user reaches the end of the page. And this will allow us to basically preload the data from the backend, and that would prevent the jumps that we are facing right now. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, we need to pass class name instead of class. Okay, let's reload. And now, before I even reach the end of the page, additional data will be loaded because we have applied the negative translation. So yeah, this will basically allow us to preload the data before we even reach the end of the page. So yeah, as you can see, we now have a really smooth infinite scrolling feature and everything is implemented really well. So yeah, that's it for this section, and I hope that you learned some new stuff along the way. And we could use a dedicated infinite scrolling component to implement this, but I still wanted to implement most of the stuff from scratch apart from the intersection observer. So yeah, I hope that you learned some new stuff along the way, and I'll see you guys in the next one.